For the last couple weeks, I haven't uploaded any videos other than my weekly predictions. So I've been wanting to mix things up, and I thought I'd do that with a power rankings video. But I wasn't quite sure how I would do that. So I decided to just simplify things and make a tier list instead. I already made an NFL team tier list at the start of the year, where I basically just projected what I thought each team's final record would be at the end of the year. So now that we've seen 4 weeks of play from every team, I'm gonna go ahead and make another one. I have the same tiers here as the last video, and I'm thinking I'm gonna try and make this a quarterly thing. We're 4 weeks into the season, so I'm making this tier list, and then at the halfway point, 8 or 9 weeks in, I'll make another one. At 12 or 13 weeks, I'll make one more, and then after the season's over, I'll go ahead and make one for all 14 playoff teams. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but anyways, enough yapping, I won't waste any more time. Going in alphabetical order like always, we're starting off with the Arizona Cardinals. I had them placed in the 6-11 or 7-10 tier last time, and I don't really see any reason to change that. Even though they weren't really expected to be good, they're still a little bit disappointing to me. Especially that Commanders game. The Cardinals offense didn't really produce, and I thought that was the strength of this team. I'll put them in the 6-11 tier, but I wouldn't be surprised if they end up doing worse than that, to be honest. Now the Falcons have looked disappointing too. The difference is they actually had expectations. I mentioned it in my week 5 predictions video, but this team is really a couple fluke plays away from being 0-4. Kirk Cousins has not lived up to the contract, and while it does feel a little harsh, I honestly don't see them finishing much better than 500 right now. I think I'm gonna have to drop them at 9-8. Now I've got the Ravens, and they are a tough team to evaluate because really the first 3 weeks of the season weren't that good for them, and then they go and absolutely demolish the Bills, who were looking like one of the best teams in football. So after a dominant performance like that, it's easy to say they're back, but at the same time, is that just recency bias? I will give them their props and say they probably go around 12-5. I think they're going to be fine, but they're not the same powerhouse they were last year. The Bills are tough for the opposite reason of the Ravens. They looked dominant the first 3 weeks of the season, and then got absolutely stomped by the Ravens. And what makes them even trickier to grade is that I didn't have high expectations for them coming into the year. And while it looked like they were proving me wrong the first 3 weeks, week 4 against the Ravens was not pretty. Before the season started, I had them going 10-7. I am going to put them in the same tier, but I think they'll be more around 11-6. Next up we have the Panthers, and it's kind of tricky to rank them too, because with Bryce Young, they genuinely looked like one of the worst teams in the last couple of years, not just this year. But ever since Andy Dalton took over, they've been competitive. So I think it is possible that they might claw their way up to 6 or 7 wins, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. I think 5-12 or worse is the right spot for them. The Bears are a weird team. They have a good defense, but their offense, especially to start the year, was abysmal. It looks like things might be turning around, but I still don't see this team being very good. I think around 8-9 sounds right for them, and I probably said the same thing before the year. And now for the Bengals, who have been one of the biggest disappointments this year. I thought they'd be going neck and neck with the Ravens for control of the division, but they're not even second best. Their defense looks atrocious. Their offense is still producing well outside of week 1 against the Patriots. I have a hard time seeing them be bad, but I think come playoff time they'll be on the outside looking in. I think they'll be around 9-8. Speaking of disappointing AFC North teams, the Cleveland Browns really do not look good. I didn't expect anything from their offense with Deshaun Watson, but they're just not a good team, and they're losing games they really have no business losing. If I had to guess, I'd say they go around 7-10. And now for our next disappointing team, the Cowboys. They looked good week 1 against the Cleveland Browns team that we now know is not very good. And outside of that, they just haven't looked impressive at all. 9-8 feels a little low, but that really does seem like how good they are right now. They don't look impressive. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if they're even going to make the playoffs. With the Broncos, I don't think much has really changed since I made my last tier list. Their defense is good, as I thought they'd be. Their offense isn't, but that doesn't surprise me. I thought they'd be around 6-11 or 7-10, and that's exactly where I'm going to put them. If I'm being honest, I think they're better than the Browns right now. The Lions look good this year, as everyone expected. Although, outside of getting torched by Seattle, it's really been on the back of a solid defense. I had them going 14-3 at the start of the year, but I didn't expect them to lose to the Bucs, so I think they'll ultimately finish around 13-4, but they are one of the best teams in the league. The Packers are interesting. I'm honestly shocked that they went 2-0 with Malik Willis. But now Jordan Love is back, and he's coming off of a very Favrean performance against the Vikings. At the end of the day, I think the offense is going to be producing now that Love is back. I think they probably finish around 10-7 or 11-6. Next is the Texans, and while I wasn't one of the people that was crazy overhyping them, I still thought they'd be better than they have been. Yes, they're 3-1, but they didn't look that good against the Bears. And they didn't look that good against the Jaguars, not to mention getting absolutely pummeled by Minnesota. They're a good team, and they're winning, but I had them up here in 12-5 at the start of the year. I think more around 11-6 sounds right. Now for the Colts, not much has changed here. With or without Anthony Richardson, I still think they're around an average team. Overall, I think they're around 8-9 or 9-8. I'll put them behind the Bengals. The Jaguars have been a lot worse than I thought they'd be. I felt like they'd be around an average team. I did not think they would fall apart the way that they have. I mean, they're the only 0-4 team in the league. I think they kind of have to go in the bottom tier. Maybe they bounce back, but I honestly don't see them winning more than 6 or 7 games with the way they're playing. Next up is the Chiefs, and I had them at 14-3 in my last tier list. But even though they're 4-0 right now, I don't see them reaching that mark with all the injuries that are piling up. I'm sure Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes can work some magic, but right now, I'm just going to put them right behind the Ravens. Now for the Raiders, and they've looked about as I'd expect, maybe even a bit worse. At the start of the year, I thought they'd be 6-11 or 7-10, and I put them just above the Broncos. I think I'm just going to swap their places. Now for another AFC West team, the Chargers. They looked good to start the year until getting decimated by injuries. I don't really know what their ceiling is now that so many key players have been hurt, but I do think they'll be better than I thought they'd be at the start of the year. I think they'll be around 9-8. I'll put them above the Bengals. Now for the Rams, and they've been a disappointing team, much to my enjoyment. Although it's not entirely their fault with all those injuries piling up. Do I think they're going to completely fall apart with those injuries? Not really, but I don't think they'll be threatening for a playoff spot. I think they'll go around 8-9. They'll probably just be a thorn in every other team's side. Now for the Dolphins, and this is tough to grade because if this was simply a ranking of how good I think every team is right now, I think the Dolphins without Tua would be the worst team in the league. But when it comes to projecting what I think their final record will be, that makes it tough. Assuming Tua comes back in a couple weeks, I think this team's going to continue racking up losses until then. And then with Tua back, they might be able to claw their way back up to 8-9 or 9-8, but I don't see them finishing any better than that. I'll just go ahead and put them above the Bears because I think by the end of the year that's where they'll be. Now for the Vikings, and they've been a pleasant surprise, unless you're an NFC North fan. I mean, if you told someone at the start of the year that the 2 undefeated teams by week 4 would be the Chiefs and the Vikings, I don't think anyone would believe you. And they haven't had an easy schedule either, beating teams like the Niners and the Texans. I think they probably finish around 12-5. I'd even put them above the Chiefs right now just because of how many injuries they have. Now for the Patriots, and I had them as the worst team in the league in my last tier list. And while through a few weeks it looked like that aged poorly, all of a sudden the Giants are playing everyone tough and the Panthers look like a totally different team under Andy Dalton. So I just might keep the Patriots all the way down there. Next up we got the Saints, and I honestly have a really hard time buying into this team. I mean, really, what have they done that's good this year? They beat the crap out of the Cowboys. Do we even know if the Cowboys are good? And outside of that, the Saints beat up on the Bryce Young-led Panthers, had an uninspiring loss to the Eagles, and a fluky loss to Atlanta. I don't think they're a bad team, but I think around 9-8 is where they'll finish. The Giants look pretty bad, no surprise there. To their credit, they have been playing teams tough, and they even got an upset against Cleveland. But with Andy Dalton under center, I honestly think even the Panthers are better than the Giants at this point. Now for the Jets, and they're another team I was much less high on than most people at the start of the year. And at this point, it's starting to look like I was right. The Jets have played exactly one game where they looked good, and it was against the Patriots, who I have down here at the very bottom of the list. They're looking like a 9-8 team to me right now. Now we've got the Eagles, and much like their rival Cowboys, they have looked underwhelming. After an embarrassing choke job against the Falcons and a beatdown against the Buccaneers, they don't look very threatening. I think they'll barely get to double-digit wins, but they just don't look like a very good team. The Steelers are looking much improved now that they actually have something resembling an offense. Their dominant defense didn't look great against the Colts, but other than that, this team looks legit. I'll say they go 10-7 or 11-6, and I'll place them right below the Texans. Now we got the 49ers, and they have not looked up to standard so far. But since we can't have good things in this world, I expect them to figure things out. Ultimately, I think they'll finish 12-5 or so, but they don't look like the same dominant team of years past. Next up is my Seahawks, and I'm pleasantly surprised with how good they look. The offense is clicking and the defense looks much improved. You can say the Lions diced them up, but we can't really be expected to do much against a top rushing offense with our backups. Once we get some key pieces back, I think the Seahawks are going to be a pain for other teams to deal with. I'd say any less than 10-7 would be disappointing from them. Now we got the Bucks, and maybe I was sleeping on them a little bit. They look really good, and I gotta give them props. They are dealing with some injuries, but I don't see any reason why they can't get to double-digit wins. Now for the Titans, and they've at least been competitive in most of their games, but they're still clearly not a good team. But ultimately, I don't think they're a bottom feeder. I think 6-11 was where they belong, but they're at the bottom of that tier. And finally, we've got another pleasant surprise, much like the Vikings. The Washington Commanders might be a decent team. Jaden Daniels is lighting it up, and all of a sudden, the Commanders are 3-1. I don't think it's too outlandish to say that this team might make a run for the playoffs. Am I ready to make some bold claims about them? Not quite, but I will say that I think they can easily finish around 8-9 or 9-8. I think they're just below the Falcons right now. And there's my team rankings. As you can see by the empty 14-3 tier, I don't really think there's a dominant team in the league right now. But I think there's definitely going to be a lot of average teams fighting for playoff spots. But anyways, that's all I got. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'll be back with another video like this halfway through the season. So if you like this one, stay tuned for that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this kind of video in the comments.